all this it really is this kind of base render that it was just no material or anything. It was just kind of like sometimes these are referred to as ambient occlusion passes, or you can just assign like a override material to your whole model and just kind of render it. So this was all just a really kind of base pass, and then I exported just from the same view, just the shadows, no edges or anything, like just shadows. And so if we zoom in here, you can see that the shadows are like sharp all the way out to the edge, and they're just solid. There's nothing special about them. So the next thing you want to think about, so if you think of this as like when we're drawing by hand, like we were talking about earlier, the most important part of the drawing is really this building, and I want to kind of get some reflection happening here. And out here, like I'm not really interested in what's happening past kind of like here. Like this is just here for context, but it's not really that important. So like what I would do in my mind, I would start kind of identifying, like, so maybe this is like that edge and around here. And then anything past that is just totally like filler. And like we don't really need any attention drawn out there. I want people to look at the building here, and then they can see this kind of reflection and everything. I want it to draw their eye back here. And as their eye starts to wander out to here, it should not really interest them very much. So we need to bring their eye back somehow, or else like the composition doesn't really work. And this is like a very kind of static kind of composition because I had the building like almost dead centered. The other tool we can use is the sky. So I'm going to have more sky in the middle and kind of fade it out on the outside. So that's kind of my overall kind of diagram of what I want to happen. And then out here, we can have like really light and like not defined very well. And then here, within probably like this area, right here in the middle, I'm just going to draw it like this because it's way faster. That needs to be super sharp and super detailed so that your eye kind of wants to stay in this zone. And no matter what your composition is, you always have a spot you would want someone to look. So what you would really want to see as you're looking at this from the beginning is, okay, what tools do I have to be able to kind of guide your eye around? So right now there's no sort of hierarchy, but with this what we can do is you could lighten the shadows, right? And then that's going to make, oops, I'm on the wrong layer. So let's turn off my base render for a second. You could have like lighter shadows, obviously. That would be one way of doing it. Or you could have less sharp shadows. So by that I mean we could create a blurry version of the shadows by blurring this, creating a copy of the shadows, and you make a blurry layer. And so to do that, I would just copy this by just hit Control J. So actually, let me move this over here. So let me put this here. So here what we're doing, we have this guy in here already, and then I made a copy of it, so they're both exactly the same. So that way I have one version that's sharper, because what we're trying to do, if this was a hand drawing, we would keep adding more detail here. We would basically start with let me make a copy of this just so we have a white background, so that I can actually like lower the opacity. So you could imagine we have this all the way out at the edge, and in the middle we would want like a more intense one, right? So if we mask this layer and then I invert the mask, so see now if you grab a brush, I'm going to use only 20% opacity here and make my brush really big. And now I'm going to bring back some of this. But the trick is, since I used 20% opacity, when I move my mouse across here, it's only going to reveal the layer there 20%. So that's as if I had 20% opacity across that part of the layer. If I go again, now it's going to be 40. And see, like what this gives you control of is now I can kind of go wherever I want and I get more than one shot at it. If you use a brush that's 100% opacity, it's really hard to get this nice fade, because what will happen is your first pass is already 100, so then that edge, so the trick is you start where you want the most definition and you move the mouse away, you let go, and then you come back to the original spot and you click again, and then you move to another place. So that way the area where you start gets clicked like 10 times, and then the area on the edge might only get the mouse over it just once. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and if you want to see what that looks like, that's basically what I drew. So I'm looking at the mask here. You hold Alt and you can just click on it. And so that's basically what I did. Without the mask, we would just have this. With the mask, I have that. And so that helps us start drawing your eye here, like we were saying. So let me use 0 for this one just to draw. Once your eye gets like past here, really, now there's no reason for you, like if you start looking here, you start realizing like there's more definition over here. So my eye is going to want to naturally kind of come back across and look at that. So that's kind of the key to this. And what makes this such a good example of it is like it's very simple and you can clearly see that it's going to work as you're working on it. Let me turn this off. So the next step would be, if this isn't enough to make it kind of go away, we can add even more. So see here, you could just totally take it away, or you could bring this back. You could change this layer to multiply now if you wanted to, so that it like doubles up on the middle. And now I'm using here my navigator so you can see kind of both at once. But basically what's going to happen here is I can even go one farther and take this one. I can even set this one to multiply because it will make a difference later on. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur. I'm going to do the standard Gaussian blur. And what this does is you can click on wherever you want to preview, and then here you can see it's going to blur. Let me see if I can zoom out. There we go. It's going to blur your image by however many pixels you put here under radius. So it's like an even blur across the whole image. And it's only going to affect this layer because I'm on this layer. And the layer I chose was the one that we had that was really light. So not only is this layer lighter than the other one with the dark shadows, it's also going to be slightly blurry. So if your eye does end up on it, there's like two things working against you wanting to stay there. Or you could look at the other way. There's two things guiding your eye back. It's like the contrast and also the definition of the shadows in the middle. So you can use, right now we're only doing like shadows. So see here, you want to be careful not to totally lose like the outer ones. So if you go too far, watch what happens. It just turns into like gray because it like exploded the whole drawing. So you want to make sure you use this to an amount where you're happy with how much blurriness you're getting. And we can lower it, we can do whatever you want. So maybe it's there. And if it's not enough, you can then, we had lowered this one really low, but I can start bringing that one back a little bit if I want to. And so now what I'm going to do is bring up the rendering. So the rendering now, without the shadows, it looks like that. With the blurry shadows, it starts looking like this, and then with the next one, it starts looking like that. So see, just those two little things make a difference between that and that. So now I'm helping to guide your eye there in that center part because I'm making it darker for you. The next thing I want to do is get rid of this like weird tint that it has, because for whatever reason, that's what it did. There's a couple ways you can do this. A real easy, like one step kind of crude way to do would be using levels. So if you go to Image, Adjustment, Levels, you can use this tool. This is kind of like a really basic way to do it. But basically anything to the left of this black little triangle is what Photoshop will consider solid black. And anything to the right of this one, Photoshop will treat as solid white. So unless your drawing makes it all the way over to these, you don't really get that full kind of range. So we can use this to kind of help with our contrast. Or you can go with like image adjustments. You could desaturate it. Am I on the right one? We could do it also down here, doing hue and saturation. You just like nuke out all the saturation, so it just turns it black and white. And then for some reason it's going like kind of slow. This is on an adjustment layer, so you can always like toggle it on and off. But if you wanted to do it the other way, I could delete that, and you can go to image adjustments, and you go here and just take out the saturation. The only downside to doing it that way is that it's hard. This one is not a, it's a smart object right now because I haven't rasterized it, so you still get it like that. But if not, normally you would have lost that option. And then now when we do the levels again, I used a shortcut which is Control L. We can pull this up a little bit, and I'm going to pull this one down. And this little mountain you're seeing in the middle, that's the histogram of what Photoshop is seeing in the image. So if you go too far, you're going to see you start losing information. So if you hold Alt while you do this, it will show you the clipping mask. So anything that shows up there is getting totally clipped, is what it's called, which basically means Photoshop will ignore. Imagine like solid black being the value of 0 like it is down here, and 100% white is the value of 255. If in the image you tell it, no, you should only go up to here, it will treat anything above 204 that would have fallen over here, it just treats it as solid white. So the farther you go left, all that information is getting lost. So there's some areas of the drawing where as you start seeing them show up in white, you're not going to have any information there. It's just going to look like it's overexposed. And then the same thing is true with the black. So if I come back this way and it starts to show up all of a sudden, see like it's creeping in. When you let go of this, that's going to be really dark in those areas. So see, that's too far. But we can pull it back a little bit. You basically use this to kind of boost your contrast a little. And then with that, we can go back to the same thing we did before and then say, you know what, out here, the only area I want to see the real rendering is like dead centered. So I'm going to create a mask. So let's shrink that so you just see that layer there. I'm going to create a layer mask, and you could do that. I just did click layer mask, and then it creates a white layer mask, and you hit Control I. Or you can, if you know you want a black layer mask to start with, you just hold Alt when you click this button, and it will make a black one. And then we grab our brush again, and then you reveal right in the middle. So I'm trying to see where I am. Okay, I'm here. So what I found is you want to use this brush, the soft round one, and don't be afraid to make a big one. The biggest mistake I see is people using a small like brush tip, and that makes it really hard to blend nicely. So it's always easier to use a bigger brush that you have like a lighter like setting to it than it is to use a tiny brush that's really hard, because then you're going to see all the little streaks everywhere. And I can show you what that looks like if you want to see that. But basically you make it big, because if you think about it, the center of the brush is where the darkest part is, and then the bigger your brush is, the smoother that kind of gradient effect happens. And if you hit the number 2, you'll get 20% opacity. I'm going to draw with white because I want to reveal here, and then I can kind of bring back some of that rendering here. So it's basically you use the mask to help you. And the cool thing with the mask is you can always reverse what color you're drawing with. So if I went too far, I just swap my color from white to black, and then now I start to hide it again. And so it makes it real easy because you can basically never get it wrong. You just keep going and then you look at it to see if you think it looks good or not. And then if you want to see what the mask looks like, you can hold Alt and click on it, or you go back. Or if you hold Shift and click on it, you can turn it off. So then you can see, like, should I have gone more or less? And then we can keep bringing it back. So I went back to white now. It's still at 20% opacity. So that's the trick that I found works really nice with the layer mask is use a brush and then keep the opacity low. And then that way it's your hand. And if it's not important, your hand never goes over there. And so it'll naturally kind of fade it for you and keep you focused where you would want someone to look. So see now, just looking at the navigator, my eye wants to stay right here. And before, all we had was like this kind of super like sharp image all the way to the edge. But just with a couple layers and a couple masks on them, it's already started to guide our eye where we want to look. The next step would be to add that sky that we had in the background. So I'm going to jump to this one just to steal the sky from it. I'm going to bring that over to this file. And so here, I'm just going to delete the mask and show you there's nothing special to the sky. It's not even like the best sky to use either because it's got a huge mountain range and it's just a picture. But I kind of like it because it has like a cool wispiness to it in the air. So here, you can choose like where you want to put it. If you want it in the background, in the foreground, like wherever. It's not really like super important. The key that you want to focus on is how do we show the sky and where do we hide the sky? That's the most important thing. Some people like putting it in the back. Depending what your layers are set to, it makes a difference here. So I could probably put it in front of that because these are all being multiplied on top. So here, I'm going to keep my sky on just normal. And then see here, this was like even just set to normal, and look how good that looks. So all we need is to create that kind of gradient up in the sky. And so there's a ton of ways we can draw skies. In this sense, we have like a really nice sky that I could use, and I'm not using any tricks. I'll show you later, there's a ton of ways you can draw your own sky and get like the exact sky you would need for any rendering. It only takes like a couple little adjustments. So here we have just a picture of the sky. And I'm going to do like a big kind of first crop because I know I definitely don't want anything down here. So the way I've been activating the layer mask before was I just clicked on the layer here and I hit mask, which just creates a giant mask that's totally solid, either white or black. If you make a selection first and then you hit mask, it kind of makes like a quick kind of mask for you. So I know I don't want anything lower than that because it has a mountain in it. And now I hit mask. So see, it's already cropped it out for me. And then you can use either a gradient or a brush again. So let me show you the gradient tool since this is pretty good for this. So what you want to use is under basics, you don't want the first one, which is foreground to background, because that will draw a gradient that's white and black, and then when you try and draw the next part of it, it kind of shifts the gradient around. What I found for this is really useful is the second one. It's called foreground to transparent. So that will basically draw like a nice feathering effect. And what I want to draw is actually not on the layer at all. I want to draw on the mask. And then on the mask, I'm going to hide. So I'm going to hit, there's a cool shortcut here. If you hit X, it toggles. So say I'm just hitting the letter X, it will swap your foreground and background. And if you combine that with this other shortcut, which is basically, if you have any color selected, see here I'm hitting X, and it's going to swap them back and forth. If you combine that with the letter D, so if you hit the letter D, D will reset your colors to be 100% black and 100% white, which is what you use on the layer mask. So if you hit the letter D, see it swapped them. So now I have black and white, and then you can hit X. So if you ever need to use your layer mask, you're never more than 2 clicks away from getting black or white because you just hit D and then you hit X to swap between the two. Or you can hit this little dude right here, which is another one, which is the default foreground and background colors. So if you can see that, you can click that, and then this is the one that does X, which is a little. So it's really useful because they're right by. I like the shortcuts that are on the left side of the keyboard because typically my hand's on the left side, and then my right hand's on the mouse. But here I'm going to go there and hit D and then hit X. So I have black. I'm using again, oops, I don't know why that opened. I'll just show you. foreground to back to transparent. And then I'm going to use 20% opacity again, click on your mask, and I'm just going to drag upwards and hold shift. And this is going to slowly start to fade the horizon. And if you ever look out at the sky, like when you're looking at it, the lower the sky is, it actually looks lighter. And a lot of people assume that the sky works the other way for some reason, and then when they draw it in the renderings, it always looks weird because they put like a really dark horizon sky, and then up here it's really light because they're trying to fade it away. But in real life, it doesn't look like that. So to us, it's going to look weird if you draw it that way. It doesn't look like a real sky. And the reason is because like as the sky curves, when you look down it, you're seeing more atmosphere in between you and the sky. Whereas if you look straight up, you're seeing straight at the sky as like perpendicular as you can. Whereas here, you're looking at it across like at a really sharp angle. Oops, I accidentally moved it. So here I'm going to get my gradient again, just hold shift. And I'm not really looking up here. I'm looking right along the edge here. I'm trying to get rid of that hard line that I had before. So the gradient works like this. I'm going to go up. The farther you go with this line, the longer the gradient becomes. So if you do like a short one, it's going to be like a quicker transition. And then the next thing that I'm realizing, which you probably noticed now, is remember we had that nice fade that was happening here? And we were saying we don't want to see anything over here. We want your eye to kind of come back across. So I need to fade the sky right there and also right here. Because without doing that, your eye gets lost up here because there's no information here. But when your eye drags its way back up, it's looking right there. So I don't want to see any information up here. So I'm going to jump to this one again and just use the same gradient tool and use it this way now. And slowly, that's probably all you need. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And then just something as simple as that. And you can go forever if you want. You can do it really light coming across. And here's something that's really cool. To reveal the glass, I don't even need to add glass really. Because what I've done there, if I get rid of my mask, see how dark the sky really is? But since there's like a gradient going across it, it's a lot lighter, right? So if I look at my mask, there's like a gradient coming across there. So if I use my lasso tool, I'll try and get this a little bit closer here. So this is all glass, right? So let's say I'm going to actually create a selection. So that way it's basically like I'm using like a masking tape, and I can only draw where I leave it exposed. Maybe we go here. And notice I'm not being like crazy precise because I'm zoomed in super far. I'm 135%. But depending how big you're going to print this drawing or how big it is on your layout, that's what's going to dictate how much detail you need to add. The sharper the image, like the bigger it needs to be in order for you to realize it. So you saw how close I was, but no one's really going to notice if it's off by a little bit when you're way out here. Obviously, like the nicer you make the selection, the better it will look. But some people get like too carried away, I think, sometimes making a perfect selection. So I'm just going to go back to my simple just brush, make this a lot bigger. Oh, it's humongous already. Let me shrink it. I always just look up here, and that's just kind of annoying because it's showing up. Okay, it's not shrinking fast enough. And then I'm going to just draw, I'm actually going to switch it to white. And then I'm going to reveal at 20%. And I'm going to go the other way now. So I'm going to make it like this. I'm just going to draw, and basically just revealing some sky there. And down here, hopefully I don't hit the mountains. Okay. And now if I hit Control D to unselect everything, so now it kind of looks like it has glass because it's reflecting the sky around it. And then the same thing is true of the water. The reason water looks like water is because it's reflecting what's up here, right? So what we can do, which actually works really nice, is we can take the whole drawing and kind of basically flip it and then crop it out so you just see it in the water. And that's basically like what we're going to be doing is to create this effect down here. So how do we do that? And we're going to go like this. So I'm going to take my sky, copy it using Control J, and I'm going to just right click on it and say, oops, I'm going to select the whole thing and then just transform using Control T. You right click and you say flip vertical. And notice that it's locked right now with the mask. That's no big deal because I'm going to delete this mask and make a new one. And then let's just hide it there. And then let's see if I can get a good selection with my wand here. Nope, I'm on the wrong one. So I gotta sample all layers. Oh, it's not continuous. So I mean that's kind of close. But you could also just use lasso for this. And this is one of those reasons why, if you understand how like the Photoshop stuff works, you can save yourself a lot of time if you set up in like your 3D model. Let's say we made that like where it should be water, we made it like a super bright red, and then we exported a version of this image where it has just the water as super bright red, or like a crazy like blue color, or like something bright that is different than all the other colors in the image. Then that would make it very easy. Here's a cool trick. If you have something selected, you can use the delete key just to fill it with whatever your background color is. So since I have the mask selected and I have that little area, so if I undo that, when you hit delete, it will fill whatever that color is with a selection. And if you hold Alt and delete, it will do the opposite. So it'll make it black. So when you're using your masks, you can always just make a selection and then hit delete and it will fill it in. So that makes it really quick to kind of work. Because I could grab something like this, and in this sense you probably want to be a little bit more careful because it's in the foreground and someone might actually notice. But they're going to be so distracted with how nice the rendering is, they won't notice that you have some weird overlap. Well, at least that's the idea. So here, I went like that and I hit delete. Oops, I hope I didn't delete it. I was on the actual layer, not on the mask. So on the mask, you hit delete and it will fill it in. Oh, it doesn't even go down there. So, but I did unmask it. So here now I can actually move this because my layer wasn't big enough. So there. So I put it there. Who cares if it lines up or not? It still looks like water. And then here I'm going to try and grab that little piece, this little guy. Oh, I got a weird one here. So I'm going to hold Alt and just get rid of this. And now hit my layer mask and hit delete. And so now when we look at it, it starts looking like a little bit like water. And then if you wanted to, we could blurry this so it's not so perfect using like the Gaussian Blur. So be careful when you see this. See how like last time we used the Gaussian Blur, it showed up here. If you click this option, it'll always change to be whatever your last blur was or last filter that you used, but it doesn't actually open the window. It just applies it exactly the way it was the last time. My camera's not working. So here, if I go Gaussian Blur, so watch, if I click that, see it never opened the window and it blurred it. But that's not what I wanted. I want to actually control it because this one needs to be a different amount. So here I can click there. Oh, and you can blur your mask. So I don't want to blur my mask. I want it to blur the layer. So filter, blur, Gaussian Blur. So you can click there. And let's see how sharp we want our shadow. So that looks kind of weird, but we can say okay. And then the next thing that's a little odd is that we don't have any reflections in here. So I can grab the rendering and do the same exact thing. Control J. I'm going to delete the layer mask and then say Control T. Great. Right click, flip vertical, and say okay. And it needs to go above the water, which, oh, I could just do this, move the water below it, probably easier. And then this one, I need to change that to be set to multiply. And then I'm gonna do this. Since I've already created this mask for the water layer, I'm gonna hold Alt and just drag it onto this one, because I only want to see this in the water there. And so then we start seeing that in there. And does it need to be on multiply, or can we get away with trying to use darken? Or that's probably enough. And so we get that there. The next step is we want it to actually look believable, that it's actually there. So notice how in this rendering it was blurry, whereas the one that we're looking at, it's not blurry. And so why is that? That's because we need to manually go in here and do that. And to do that, we can use, let me just rasterize this layer because I don't want all these effects like resetting each time. Raster. Unlock it again. So here what I want to do is use the smudge tool, which is this little dude. It looks like a hand, like just smudging your paper. So this guy, what this does is, there's two ways you control it. You have, well, there's a couple of things you can adjust, but we're going to use like a standard soft brush like we were using. And this doesn't actually draw anything, but it starts like smudging the drawing, like as if you just like moved your hand across your sketch and it just got a weird smudge in it. But there's two main things you want to look at. It's the strength, and then it's how big you use the brush. So I found if you take a two-step approach, it works really good. So you use a big brush that's really like not very strong, and that will give it like the initial kind of like waviness. And then you come back with a really strong smudge that's really small, and that gives it like the look of little ripples and like choppiness. If you only do one or the other, it never really looks like realistic, but if you combine both, it makes it really good. So I'm going to use like a big one like this and use like a low amount of strength. And then click here, make sure you click the actual layer. And I'm going to slowly make it go to the, I don't think it's actually in the right spot. So let me grab my layer, which is probably why it was looking so weird. So yeah, so obviously we're like kind of making it up as we go, so maybe something like that is better. And so I'm going to use my smudge tool now. So I have it set to like a big brush, it's like 7% strength. And I'm going to click and drag really little to the right. And I'm going to let go, because sometimes you got to wait for this tool. And so see, it's like kind of warping it. And then it does kind of blur it a little bit. So then you can go that way a little bit. And then here I'm going to pull this all a little bit to the left. Don't go crazy with the big brush, because that's always going to end up looking kind of goofy. If like you have this whole thing, like it looks like a spaghetti going through, it doesn't look realistic. But now we have like a little wiggle to it. And then we can now swap, and it's still thinking because it's not letting me switch this. There. So now I'm going to switch to like a way stronger one. Maybe we go to like 30. And I'm going to make it really small, like this big. So see, it's like really tiny. And then what you do with this is you just cut straight across like this. Like you click and drag straight across, and then you let go. And then you come back the other direction. Click and drag and let go, click and drag and let go. So then by doing this, we start to create like little ripples coming across it like that. And if you actually look at like waves and like reflections and stuff, you'll realize that's all that there really is to it. And then you can make it more realistic or not. Sometimes like it looks good if you go the same way a couple times, so you get like a little bit of a bigger one, so they're not so like consistent. And like those little things, you can kind of, maybe the farther you are, like the more choppy, maybe right here was choppy. So we make like a lot of ripples here. Be careful with it though, because you can get carried away and then it looks like super wonky. But basically like that, and then remember, always zoom back out and make sure what you're doing is actually even visible at the scale of what you're drawing. Because we get carried away sometimes making it look good like up close, and when you look at it at like the big level, like from the point of view of someone actually looking at your drawing, no one would even notice. So going back to this one, the only other step that this one has that we haven't done yet is this top kind of layer. So see how ours looks really similar to that. There's a couple ways we can kind of boost the contrast on ours. So I'm looking at it. What we need to do here is we can add, what I like doing on top of all my renderings is adding a curves, because right now we don't have the full kind of dynamic range in the image, but we can get that by using this. And so I can start to like kind of make this a little bit darker by pulling this that way. Maybe you pull the highlights up just a tiny bit, and then if you pull this down, we can kind of get to render like that a little bit. And so see there, that really helps kind of make it not look so gray, and it helps kind of expand like the range, so you have like dark darks and like bright brights, whereas here we kind of had just in the middle, everything's kind of gray. And like if you want to bring up some of the images, like we can find like the rendering, and then you can add more contrast to it using levels. Like we can bring up the darks and the rendering. And you can play around with like where it needs to be. And if you think it's okay there, then you can leave it like that. And that's pretty much all I had done to make this one, the original one. The only other thing that this one had was I selected all the layers and then copied them and then merged them into one. So you can do this, and then you can say Control J, makes a copy of all of them, and you just right click and say merge. I only merge layers if they're a copy, so that way, so now I have all the layers as a one like image, and you can set that to like overlay, and it does this kind of super boost thing, and you can like lower that opacity a lot. A cool thing you can do with this kind of thing is like you could then, even if you wanted like a crazy kind of like sci-fi effect or something like that, you can then start playing with these kind of tricks. Like you copy all the layers, you get it into one, and let's just make it normal. I'll make the copy of it so that I don't lose the original one. So here you could go to filter, blur, and we can do a radial blur and change the method to zoom, and then you can make it go like nuts. And watch this, this will look like you're like out of control in here. It's like, oh man, I never saved. So hopefully it doesn't crash. I had like a ton of stuff open. I hope it does a good one too. I didn't adjust the location. You can kind of choose where you want the location of the zoom, but it's going to make it look like you're driving like 100 miles an hour straight out this building. And it's going to like blur it out so it looks like it has like motion. and then you swap it from normal display to like an overlay or a soft light or some sort of blend mode that's going to prioritize the lighter colors or like contrast, and then you basically just blur it out. So see here it started to look like kind of cool, like only in like really that area right there. But then if you set this one to be like the overlay, and then we've got like this cool kind of light effect happening now. Or we can set it to one of these soft light or something like that, and then you can kind of like cycle through these and see which one you think works best. So probably you can keep it on overlay. And then that curves adjustment would need to be adjusted. Or I could just move it below so it's not as bad. But then now, like, since we've applied those kind of changes, the image is going to change, so you want to not overdo it. But the cool thing, if you use the adjustment layers, you have kind of full control of them, and you can make it look the right way. So you can get basically something really close to this. The only difference between those two is these have different masks. So in some areas I was more blurry than the other ones, and but you get the same kind of effect going across both. I think this one has darker shadows, especially like around here. So does that make sense to you guys? Is that kind of easy to follow?